He invited his ex to humiliate her, but she walked in and stunned the whole room. He invited his poor ex-wife to his wedding to humiliate her. Then her arrival shocked everyone. The envelope came on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between bills and grocery flyers. My name was written in his familiar handwriting, the same slanted letters that used to sign birthday cards and love notes. For a split second, I thought it might be a mistake. Some old document, a stray paper from our divorce years ago. Then I opened it. "You are cordially invited." The words blurred for a moment, my eyes catching on the names printed in perfect script. His name and hers. My breath caught. My ex-husband was inviting me to his wedding. It was almost comical. The syrupy politeness of the invitation, the perfectly embossed paper, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering on it. But beneath the gloss, I could feel it. The undertone of mockery, sharp enough to cut. That night, I got the full story from a mutual friend who'd had one too many glasses of wine. "He said he wants you there," she whispered, "so his new wife can see what she's upgraded from." Her words sat in my chest like a stone, a warning, a performance. I was to be the visual aid for what failure looks like. I spent the next day pacing my tiny living room, replaying our history, the whirlwind romance when I was barely in my 20s. The way he swept me into his world, expensive dinners, lavish parties, then slowly began pointing out every way I didn't fit. How I dressed, how I spoke, the subtle digs that grew into sharper ones until I believed them myself. After the divorce, I had nothing but a dented car, a stack of bills, and a hollow ache where my self-worth used to be. It took years to rebuild, not just my finances, but my spine. And now here he was, hoping to parade me like some charity case he'd outgrown. I could have ignored the invitation, tossed it in the trash and moved on. But then I pictured his smug grin when I didn't show, the satisfaction he'd get from imagining me too embarrassed to face him. Number that wasn't going to happen. I RSVP'd yes that same night, but this wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about control. My control. If he wanted me on display, I'd choose how the display looked. Over the following weeks, I planned my appearance like a strategy. I found a gown, sleek, understated, the kind that whispered elegance instead of shouting for attention. I booked a stylist, scheduled a manicure, even practiced my makeup until my reflection looked like the woman I'd become, not the one he'd broken down. This time, I wouldn't be walking into his world as a guest desperate for approval. I'd be walking in as someone who didn't need a place at his table. But I had no idea just how much my entrance would shake them. The days leading up to the wedding felt like walking through a tunnel lined with old ghosts. Every errand, every quiet moment seemed to summon a memory I thought I'd buried. I remembered the first time I saw him, that magnetic smile, the way he spoke, like every word was meant only for me. Back then I thought it was charm. I didn't know it was the start of a performance, one where I'd spend years as his supporting character. In the early months, he swept me into his world. Rooftop dinners, champagne toasts, weekend trips to cities I'd only read about. It was intoxicating. But somewhere along the way, the warmth shifted. He started noticing my clothes weren't polished enough, that my little apartment before we married was cute, but small. That my family's way of celebrating holidays was a bit quaint. After the divorce, his voice lingered in my head. Every time I handed over my card at a thrift store, every time I cooked dinner from a discount grocery haul, I could hear that faint edge of disapproval. It wasn't just the financial struggle that hurt. It was knowing he'd see it as proof he was right about me. Word of my invitation spread quickly through our old circle. Friends called, some concerned, some curious. "Why would you even go?" one asked. You don't need to put yourself through that. Another warned, they'll talk, you know. That crowd, they feed on drama. I knew they were right. His circle was full of polished smiles that could cut like glass, people who measured worth by the labels on your clothes and the price tags on your shoes. Walking into that ballroom meant walking into judgment, whispered behind napkins and raised eyebrows. But I also knew something they didn't. I wasn't the same woman he'd last seen. I'd learned how to carry myself without apology. I'd learned that sometimes the quietest presence in the room speaks the loudest. I pored over racks of dresses until I found it. A deep emerald gown that skimmed my frame without clinging, its off-shoulder neckline showing just enough to be elegant without trying. The fabric felt cool and heavy in my hands, like it belonged to someone who knew her own worth. I booked the salon, asked for soft waves and a makeup look that highlighted my features instead of masking them. Nothing too loud, nothing that screamed for approval. Every choice I made was deliberate, a reminder to myself that I wasn't there to compete. I was there to reclaim my space. The night before the wedding, I laid everything out. Dress, shoes, clutch, the small gift I'd chosen for the couple. I stood in front of the mirror and saw a woman who had walked through fire and learned how to breathe again. No fear, no shrinking, just composure. Then the wedding day arrived, and so did my chance to turn the tables. I arrived earlier than necessary, my heels clicking against the polished marble of the entrance hall. The venue was a grand, glittering ballroom draped in white roses and gold trim. Exactly his style. Heads turned before I even reached the reception area. Conversations dipped in volume, then swelled with that hushed, knowing tone people get when they think you can't hear. Ex-wife. She actually came. God, I wonder what she's wearing under that coat. I could feel their eyes taking inventory. Hair, dress, shoes, trying to decide if I was here as the tragic cautionary tale they'd been promised. Then I saw him. Across the room, he stood with a champagne flute in one hand, his other arm resting lightly on the bride's waist. That smug smile was unmistakable, the same one he'd worn when he thought he was 3 moves ahead. I walked over, unhurried, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Look who made it," he said, voice dripping with false warmth. "Sweetheart, this is an old chapter." The bride turned toward me, her expression perfectly composed, pity painted over curiosity. She extended her hand. "It's so nice you could come," she said, like she was welcoming a stray cat to her porch. I smiled, taking her hand firmly. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." No sarcasm, no edge, just grace. And then I let them stew in it. Instead of lingering by the bar like an outcast, I drifted into the crowd, greeting old acquaintances as though I'd just seen them last week. I asked about their children, complimented their outfits, laughed easily at their stories. More than a few seemed pleasantly surprised that I remembered details about their lives, details my ex probably never noticed in the first place. Soon, the whispers changed. "She looks amazing." I didn't expect her to be so confident. "I heard she's doing really well now." I caught sight of him glancing over more often, his smile tightening ever so slightly each time. The bride's gaze followed his, her fingers curling against her champagne glass. When I stepped onto the dance floor for a slow song with one of his older uncles, people were smiling at me, genuinely. A few even came up to say how glad they were to see me again. It wasn't dramatic, I wasn't loud. But the atmosphere was shifting and he could feel it. Still, I hadn't even played my strongest card, because in my small satin clutch, tucked between a lipstick and my phone, was the real blow. The one I'd chosen carefully, knowing it would land at exactly the right moment. And I was just waiting for that moment to arrive. Dinner plates had been cleared, Wine glasses refilled, and the low hum of conversation filled the hall. The MC tapped the microphone, smiling warmly. Before we wrap up the speeches, are there any words from loved ones who'd like to share something with the couple? I didn't hesitate. I stood smoothing my gown and felt the collective ripple as heads turned. My ex's eyebrows lifted, curiosity mixed with something smug. The bride tilted her head, the polite mask back in place. I stepped toward the microphone, smiling as if this was the most natural thing in the world. First, congratulations, I began, turning toward them. Truly, it's a beautiful day, and you both look radiant. They nodded, the room watching like an audience at a play. I wanted to thank you, I continued, my voice warm, steady. Not for the invitation, though that was unexpected, but for what came after our story ended. You made it so easy for me to find real happiness. A murmur rolled through the tables. My ex's smile stiffened. I let the pause stretch, then lifted my hand toward the back of the room. In fact, I'd like you all to meet him. Every head turned. There he was, my fiancé, standing tall in a tailored navy suit, his kind eyes meeting mine with quiet pride. He stepped forward just enough to be seen, the light catching the simple platinum band he already wore as a promise. Gasps, whispers, a few audible "oh my gods." We met 2 years after the divorce, I said, the words crisp but soft. He's different, the kind of man who measures worth in love, not in labels. And last month he asked me to marry him. The spotlight, without force or volume, had shifted. I didn't have to say a word about my ex's arrogance or the years I'd spent rebuilding from the rubble he left. My presence, my truth, was enough. My ex's face was a study in cracks, the confident grin barely holding, eyes darting to the guests as though searching for a script. The bride's smile faltered, her gaze flicking between him and me, suspicion blooming where pity had been. I raised my glass toward them. So today, I'm here to wish you the same thing I've found. The kind of partnership that doesn't just look good in photos, but feels good when no one's watching. It was polite, it was gracious, and it landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was knowing. A slow, deliberate rhythm that made him shift in his chair. I stepped back, my heart steady. My clutch still felt light in my hand, but I could feel the weight of the final truth inside it, because I wasn't done. I had one more truth to drop. I let the applause fade before I spoke again, keeping my voice even, almost conversational. You know, I said, glancing at the glass in my hand, there's something about being underestimated that teaches you things no easy road ever could. When people assume you'll never rise, they forget that the view from the bottom makes the climb worth it. A few guests leaned forward, listening more intently now. I lost a lot when my marriage ended, I continued. Not just a partner, but a sense of place. I was told, directly and indirectly, that I wouldn't manage on my own. That without the right name, the right house, the right image, I'd fade into the background. I let my eyes drift briefly toward my ex. His gaze met mine, rigid and unblinking. But here's the thing, I said, smiling just enough. When you're left with nothing, you learn to build from the ground up. And what you build yourself, no one can take it away. Not anymore. The room was silent except for the faint clink of silverware somewhere in the back. I lifted my glass again. To everyone here, thank you for the kindness you've shown me, both now and back then. I didn't need to elaborate. The ones who'd turned their noses up at me years ago shifted in their seats. The ones who'd been quietly kind wore small, knowing smiles. A smattering of applause began, then grew until it filled the space. But even as people clapped, I could feel the weight of their attention fixed not on me, but on him. My ex, the man who'd invited me expecting a spectacle at my expense, was now sitting under the harshest spotlight of all, the one where he had no control. I stepped away from the microphone. My fiancée was already at the edge of the dance floor, hand extended. We didn't linger. No goodbyes to the couple, no last glances over my shoulder. We walked out together, the murmurs of the crowd following us all the way to the door. The late evening air hit my skin like freedom. In the car, the quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was full. My fiancé reached over, squeezing my hand once before starting the engine. "You okay?" he asked. I looked out at the venue lights in the rearview mirror, then back at him. Better than okay, because I didn't feel guilt, not a shred. For years, my ex had defined the story, the way people saw me, the way I saw myself. Tonight, in the very room he'd chosen for my humiliation, I'd taken it back. And I hadn't needed to raise my voice or seek revenge in the way he'd expect. I'd simply shown him, and everyone else, that I'd outgrown the role he'd written for me. He wanted to humiliate me. I left him humbled instead.